Today's MMA news, and there has been a lot of it. Tony Ferguson is not going to retire. We're going to try to figure out some opponent for him. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson wants to fight at UFC 295 against either Garry or Della Maddalena. We got Magomed Ankalaev taking on Johnny Walker. We'll give an early prediction for that. Jonathan Martinez, Adrian Yanez. We'll give an early prediction on that one. Jiri Prochazka does say he wants that vacant title fight against Alex Pereira. We got Gabriel Bonfim calling out Neil Magny. We got an early prediction on that one. Derrick Lewis should move to the PFL. We're going to talk about that as well. We do have Darrius Flowers calling out Trevor Peak, which I'm going to be dead serious. That's a banger. And then we had Bobby Green calling out Renato Moicano money. Moicano. It's a good fight, but is it the correct fight to make? I don't know. And Alex Pereira, probably the craziest news of all. Alex Pereira wants to move down to middleweight for a trilogy against Israel Adesanya after claiming the light heavyweight gold against Jiri Prochazka. He wants to beat Jiri, maybe at UFC 296, and then move down the middleweight, cut all of that weight for the trilogy instead of having Adesanya come to you. Yeah, we got a lot of MMA news, so, check the description for the timestamps and things like that. Like and subscribe. Let's get into this MMA news. Alex Pereira, in my mind, we are 1-1 at middleweight. I won one at middleweight with a round 5 TKO. Adesanya won the other one, I believe it was a round 3 TKO. Nothing more fair to make the trilogy at middleweight. Alex Pereira still believes he can make the weight and cut back down to the UFC middleweight division of 185 pounds to take on Israel Adesanya. Now, there's a lot of talk about him versus Jiri Prochazka, which is very, 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 very likely. Whether he wins that one, whether he loses that one. Let's just say Alex Pereira goes out there and knocks out Jiri Prochazka in round number 1. I do believe that the UFC would look at this and be like, well, Adesanya just went out there and beat Duplessis, just went out there and beat Sean Strickland. Let's make the trilogy a big, huge money fight to be made. In the UFC middleweight division, Alex Pereira wants to become a simultaneous double champion and doesn't want Adesanya to be the one moving up to light heavyweight to make him the double champion simultaneously. He wants to move down to 185 after after getting the UFC light heavyweight belt. This is crazy news because a lot of people were thinking, like myself, that Alex Pereira was maybe going to win at light heavyweight, stay there, wait for Izzy to come up, and then they have their trilogy. But no, he wants to move down to 185 pounds. What do y'all think? Who wins the trilogy? In the middleweight division, meaning Pereira is going to have to cut a lot of weight. What do y'all think? Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya. Derrick Lewis has an option here. He's got an option, okay? He's a free agent. No longer signed to the UFC. No longer signed to BKFC, PFL, Bellator, anything. He's a free agent. He can do whatever the heck he wants. Now, the UFC most likely is paying him $100,000, $200,000, maybe more, maybe less, maybe $300,000, maybe $50,000. I don't know. But definitely not more than $500,000 per fight to compete inside of the UFC and take on guys like Marcos Rogerio de Lima, like he just did, to take on guys like Sergey Spivak, Sergey Pavlovich, Tai Tuivasa, Cyril Gane, and all of these absolute beasts in the UFC heavyweight division, probably getting paid a few $100,000, maybe less, maybe more. In the UFC's heavyweight division, is currently ranked at number 11. I do believe we'll get right back up inside of that top 10 since he just beat Marcos Rogerio de Lima. And what is next for him in the UFC? He just beat a guy that's like number 16, number 15 in the UFC heavyweight division. He can go down in the rankings again and fight Jairzinho Rozenstruik. He could get the loser of Tai Tuivasa, Alexander Volkov as the main event of the UFC Fight Night, main card of a pay-per-view. He could do like the loser of Cyril Gane's next fight with Sergey I don't know. There's so many things that you could do in the UFC's heavyweight division, but bottom line is, he's not really going to be making that much money in all of those fights. Granted, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 is a lot of money for the average bloke, but when you get a guaranteed $2 million to fight Francis Ngannou, personally, you got to take that. And he was on a huge 6-fight win streak in the UFC's heavyweight division. Had a main event with Mark Hunt. He was the favorite in that fight in Auckland, New Zealand, where Mark Hunt is from. And he ended up losing that fight. It was pretty unfortunate, but he came back. Knocked out Marcin Tybura in round number 3. And then guess who he fought? Ladies and gentlemen? He fought Francis Ngannou on a Miocic Cormier card in the co-main event, in one of the most boring fights you will ever see. One of the most absolutely boring fights you will quite literally ever see. But he won. He won unanimously on the judges' scorecards. And what did Ngannou do since then? What did Ngannou do since the Derrick Lewis fight? Knocked out Blades in 45 seconds. Knocked out Velasquez in 26. Junior Dos Santos, 1:11. Rosenstruck in 20. Stipe in just 2 rounds. And beat Cyril Gane by unanimous decision. Now he's boxing Tyson Fury in October. And he doesn't have an MMA opponent yet. There's nobody in MMA that he's really looking at fighting at the moment. There's some guys in the PFL. Ante Della, Maurice Green, all of these names. But if you're asking me, what I'd like to see from Francis Ngannou, what would be the most fun fight to be made in the UFC heavyweight division? I know the last fight was absolute dog doo-doo, but what the best fight they could possibly make outside of the UFC, and now that Derrick Lewis is a free agent, this is it. Derrick Lewis, Francis Ngannou rematch. Maybe Ngannou wins that fight, maybe he loses. If he wins, great. You just made millions and millions of dollars. Lewis, you make $2 million outside of the UFC. And maybe Derrick Lewis wins. Derrick knocks out Francis Ngannou, beats him for a second time. And at that point, he could re-sign with the UFC and come back for an immediate title fight. You never know. I do believe if he goes back to the UFC, re-signs with the UFC, he's going to get Jairzinho Rozenstruik. He's going to get Tai Tuivasa rematch, an Alexander Volkov rematch, or he can get a freaking Francis Ngannou fight. He can do a 1-fight contract, beat Ngannou, lose to Ngannou, come right back to the UFC. You win, you lose, your star power goes up either way. You can get knocked out by Ngannou, your star power goes up. You knock out Ngannou, you're one of the biggest stars in the world, beating the guy that just fought Tyson Fury. I don't know. I think you should take that $2 million and go to the PFL. What do y'all think? I think Ngannou would win, but it's a win-win for Derrick Lewis. Win or lose, I think he should leave the UFC. Magomed Ankalaev is taking on Johnny Walker in the UFC's light heavyweight division at UFC Abu Dhabi 294. Makhachev versus Oliveira 2, and this is fun. I do like this matchup a lot. I was expecting an Ankalaev versus Rakic fight, and I was expecting Johnny Walker to maybe get a Nikita Krylov, or Johnny Walker to maybe get Jan Blachowicz now that he's coming off that loss. But this is the fight that the UFC has settled on. Ankalaev, a 4-1 favorite. On the Tapology predictions as of right now, Johnny is taller, he is lengthier, he is the better striker. Magomed Ankalaev, though, all he needs to do is close that distance and land the takedown on Johnny Walker, and he is gonna win. And that's kind of the opinion on most of these guys at UFC 294. All of the bearded Russians, Mohamed Mokaev, Ankalaev, Ikram doesn't really have a beard. He has a little bit of a beard. Hamza Chimaev and Islam Makhachev all coming in with that game plan of getting it down and winning it on the ground. That's the same here for Magomed Ankalaev. If he gets the takedown, he could very well grind for 3 straight rounds. But I don't think Ankalaev's striking really is that bad either. I think he could strike pretty evenly with Johnny Walker for a little bit, mix in those takedowns and win the fight like that. There is no betting odds as the fight literally just got announced hours ago. So I am going to go with, as a prediction, Magomed Ankalaev 30-27. Unanimous decision. Maybe one of the judges will give it a Walker due to landing some of the bigger shots on the feet. But I think if Ankalaev can get it down and land a substantial amount of ground and pound shots on Johnny Walker, he could possibly find a finish or at least get that unanimous decision. Should be a good one at light heavyweight. This probably determines the next title challenger for the winner of Alex Pereira, Jiri Prochazka, which I'm assuming will take place at UFC 296 as the main event. So the winner of that one versus the winner of this one, maybe UFC 298, maybe UFC 299 in 2024, and then Jamal Hill gets the winner of all that. But there's some high stakes here. I do believe winner will be next in line for a title. I do have Ankalaev by unanimous decision. Tony Ferguson is not going to be retiring after losing to Bobby Green with 6 seconds left in round number 3 with an arm triangle choke submission after losing round number 1 and round number 2. He's currently 39 and a half years old, probably going to be 40 years old by the time he fights next, and he's not going to retire. We have a quote from him on his Instagram. As the fight began, I was in the X zone, flowing and feeling confident. Bobby knew the direction of the fight, and I believe he knew what he was going to do when he poked me in the eye. He has a big history of moves like this. It significantly impaired my vision, making it difficult to see clearly out of my eye. Despite this eye poke, I never considered stopping the fight. Although the doctor wanted to, throughout my career, I've always pushed through the challenges and never given up. This time was no different. Unfortunately, in sports, setbacks are like this are part of the journey. While I won't use the eye poke as an excuse for the outcome, I know for a fact I have more to give. Moving forward, I plan to be working closely with Dana White, Hunter Campbell, and my entire team to assess what is next. And this is what I think should be next. No. I got other suggestions. It's not just this. If Tony's not going to retire, which I do believe he should, who else is there? We got Jim Miller. This is one of my options for a fight for Tony Ferguson at UFC 300 in the UFC lightweight division. That'd be a legend versus legend fight in the UFC lightweight division. And he's been fighting those type of guys recently. Gaethje, Oliveira, Darrius, Chandler, Diaz, Green. These are all veterans and legends of the lightweight division. Even before that, beating some veterans as well, like Dos Anjos, Anthony Pettis, and Donald Cerrone. Now, if we check out the UFC lightweight rankings and we go down to here, we do have guys like Clay Guida at number 46. That could make sense. This is a legend of the game that has been fighting for so long now, beating the who's who of the UFC lightweight division and also losing to the who's who of the lightweight division. We got Jim Miller, like I was saying, at number 39 on the UFC Tapology lightweight rankings. I think that one could also definitely make some sense. He's been losing to decent guys as well, like Anthony Hernandez, Joe Solecki, and Vince Pichel. I still believe a Tony Ferguson fight would be relatively competitive there. Clay Guida, that would be relatively competitive with Tony Ferguson. And the last one I did suggest was this one right here. Another option is the Menace Michael Johnson fight in the UFC lightweight division. This was one of the guys that beat Tony like right before that huge win streak that Tony went on back in 2012. A unanimous decision on the prelims of a UFC fight night with, oh my gosh, 2 Ferguson opponents in Nate Diaz and Jim Miller also on that card. But Tony lost that fight so long ago after going like 3-0 in the UFC, lost to Michael Johnson in 2012 and just went on the craziest streak of wins over and over and over again until the, 6-fight losing streak that he went on. So, again, a Michael Johnson fight I do believe does make some sense. A Clay Guida one would make some sense. And then a Jim Miller one would also definitely make some sense in the UFC lightweight division. If you're checking it out, guys, outside of that top 50, there's really not a lot of, veterans in the UFC lightweight division I'd be too happy to put against Tony Ferguson. Even the up-and-comers, I wouldn't really agree that any of them should be taking on Tony Ferguson in the UFC lightweight division. So I think it comes down to those three guys. I'm looking. I don't really see anyone. Maybe a groovy Lando Renato would be a fun fight. But personally, I think it comes down to those three in either Michael Johnson, Clay Guida, or Jim Miller next in the UFC lightweight division. What do y'all think? Who should Jim Miller fight? Who should Tony Ferguson fight? What are the fights to make for the legends of the lightweight division? Stephen Wonder Boy Thompson is not going to be rebooking the Michel Pereira fight in the UFC welterweight division. He says he either wants Jack Della Maddalena or Ian Garry for UFC 295's main card pay-per-view against one of these two up-and-comers in the welterweight division. He says if Ian Garry goes out there and beats Jeff Neal, a guy that, Wonder Boy has also beat in the welterweight division, that he would love to do him versus Ian Garry next in the UFC's welterweight division. He says if Jack Della Maddalena doesn't fight at UFC Australia, or maybe he does and wins that fight, he would love to also do a Jack Della Maddalena fight at UFC 295. He says he does not want to go to 293, doesn't want to go on to UFC Boston at 292. He would like to go out to UFC 295, a huge main card, one of the last pay-per-views of the year, and take on one of these two up-and-coming strikers in the welterweight division. I do like the Ian Garry one. If Ian does get past Jeff Neal, I would love an Ian Garry Wonderboy Thompson fight. That would be absolutely fun to be had in the welterweight division. What do y'all think? Wonderboy versus Ian Garry, Wonderboy versus Jack Della, and what do y'all think about him not wanting to rebook the Michel Pereira fight? Put your thoughts down below. Jiri Prochazka wants his next fight, obviously, to be against Alex Pereira for the vacant UFC light heavyweight belts. And I do believe it's going to be this year. He says his shoulder injury is 100% healed. UFC 294 already has their main and co-main event. UFC 295 has its main event, and they're trying to make that co-main event with Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. So it only makes sense that we're going to get Jiri Prochazka, Alex Pereira at UFC 296 now that he's fully healed. And Alex Pereira, that does seem like a good turnaround date for UFC 291 to come back at UFC 296. The number 2 middleweight in the world, who just beat the number 3 light heavyweight in the world and is probably going to be entering in on the rankings tomorrow at that number 3 spot, is most likely going to take on Jiri Prochazka next, because Magomed Ankalaev is taking on Johnny Walker. Magomed's already beaten Nikita Krylov, and Rakic is coming off a loss to Jan Blachowicz. So it is very obvious Prochazka versus Alex Pereira is going to be next, and I do believe it will be at UFC 296. It is not confirmed, but I do believe more than 95% of the time this is what is going to happen, unless some crazy injury happens to Jiri again, or Alex Pereira has an injury. This is the fight the UFC will make. Alex Pereira, Jiri Prochazka, UFC 296 main event. I do have Jiri Prochazka, round number 3, round number 4, ground and pound, TKO. Jonathan Martinez taking on Adrian Yanez on October 14th. UFC Fight Night, and this is the number 14 contender and the number 13 contender in the UFC's bantamweight division. I didn't even notice this, but somehow Jonathan Martinez has moved up all the way to number 13 in the bantamweight division for no reason whatsoever. They just moved him above Adrian Yanez. And now we're going to get number 13 versus number 14 UFC Fight Night main card for an absolutely amazing striking match. It's going to be 3 rounds in the bantamweight division via ESPN Deportes. I think Jonathan Martinez has a good kicking game, good overall striking, good volume and things like that. But I think Yanez has the power advantage and is going to land the better shots here and even get close to a finish on Jonathan Martinez. I am going to go with an Adrian Yanez 29-28 decision in a top 3 fight of the night contender type of fight. Jonathan Martinez, Adrian Yanez, very, very fun one in my opinion. I do believe Adrian barely out-edges him. I think the volume will be very even in terms of punches. The kicking volume goes Jonathan Martinez, but the more powerful shots will get the win towards Adrian Yanez, in my opinion. Good fight in the bantamweight division. Bobby Green calls out Renato Moicano for his next fight in the lightweight division. He says, I want to make some money. He wants him on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view versus Renato Moicano. Money Moicano. I do believe they can make this fight either for UFC 295 or for UFC 296. Either way, it would make sense. Bobby Green coming off some good wins in the UFC lightweight division. Did get knocked out by a guy that does go by the name of Drew Dober in the UFC lightweight division. Bobby Green's probably like at number 17. Number 18 right outside of the rankings. Renato's at number 13 with no wins inside of the rankings. He got knocked out by Rafael Fiziev. Bobby Green had a really close fight with Rafael Fiziev. I don't believe Renato would have won this fight. He does say he'd rather fight guys like Jalen Turner or Paddy the Baddy Pimblett, which are both very, very fun fights. But Renato Moicano is about that money, and a Bobby Green fight would definitely make them some money. So what do y'all think? Renato Moicano versus Bobby Green. Personally, I don't think it gets made. I think Renato takes a different fight. I think Bobby Green probably takes a different fight. But if it does happen, I would have to go Renato Moicano by submission in round 2. And probably a rear naked choke. What do y'all think? Renato versus Bobby. Gabriel Bonfim, 25-year-old, 15-0 up-and-comer with a 100% finish rate. Von flew on the Contender Series in 4 minutes, joined the UFC, and Trey Waters is in the UFC now. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He beat him easily in round number 1, beat Munir Lazez in 49 seconds of round 1 with a guillotine, and then beat Trevin Giles in 1 minute 13 seconds of round number 1 again with a guillotine. He's got a few knockout wins on his record, one of them on an 8-0 undefeated Brenner Alberth, who also has an 100% finish rate in the UFC welterweight division. This man, Gabriel Bonfim, is really, really good. I mean, he was a 2-1 favorite on Eduardo Garvon for the LFA vacant welterweight strap co-main event, and he made it look easy with yet another 1 minute freaking submission. And now he wants another. He wants another 1 minute finish, and this time he calls out Neil Magny for the main card of UFC Sao Paulo, Brazil, in that fight night that's coming up. And I do believe Gabriel would win against Neil Magny after seeing Neil Magny lose to Shavkat Rakhmonov, after seeing him lose to Gilbert Burns, getting taken down and submitted easily by both of those two guys. I do believe Gabriel Bonfim wins, but do I believe he accepts? Because he's at number 11 right now in the UFC welterweight division. And we've got guys like Jack Della Maddalena right here, which I believe stylistically is an easier matchup for him than Gabriel Bonfim. You got Michel Pereira, which, I mean, even though he just missed weight, there's a good chance they could just still give Michel the step up in a very fun fight and do Michel versus Neil Magny. They could give him an easier opponent than that. Some of the other up-and-comers in the welterweight division do include guys like Nicholas Dalby, do include guys like Michael Morales maybe. In the welterweight division, I don't personally think they do the Gabriel Bonfim fight. I actually believe, because Neil Magny has already accepted a Della Maddalena fight for UFC 293, I believe that's what they're going to do instead of giving Gabriel Bonfim the fight. I believe for Gabriel, it is a little bit too early. I would give Gabriel Bonfim a good test in Muslim Salikov in the welterweight division, a guy that's only lost to legit guys in Nicholas Dalby and Jingli Yang Lee. I think that'd be a very, very fun one for Gabriel Bonfim at UFC Sao Paulo, Brazil. And if he wins that, then I might consider giving him a Michael Chiesa, then maybe giving him Neil Magny if he loses his next fight, and getting him inside of that top 15. But for now, I don't believe he gets this shot. What do y'all think? Gabriel Bonfim, Neil Magny. Darrius Flowers calling out Trevor Peek for a UFC lightweight fight, and this is absolute fun and chaos in the lightweight division. Both 28 years old, both are coming off losses in the UFC's lightweight / welterweight division, because Darrius did lose up a weight class against Jake Matthews. He's supposed to fight Eric Gonzalez earlier this year. I thought he would have gotten the TKO in that fight, but Eric Gonzalez ended up instead not fighting Darrius Flowers and fighting, well, Trevor Peek, and got knocked out in round number 1. Now, Darrius Flowers really, really wants this fight. He even DM'd me saying, I want the Trevor Peek fight. 8-1. Only loss coming by decision with 8 KOs all in round number 1 or round number 2. Not even against bad competition. A 7-0 guy, a former UFC fighter, worthy. Malik Lewis undefeated, and Eric Gonzalez in the UFC. This is pure violence. I'm just going to say that right now. This is absolutely pure violence. And I am going to go for my early prediction, 3 rounds in the UFC lightweight division. I'm going to have to go Darrius Flowers, 29-28 decision in an absolutely fun fight. In the lightweight division, 5'9" is Darrius Flowers, and 5'9" is Trevor Peek. 70-inch reach for Peek, 71-inch for Flowers, so not much of a difference. It should be really, really fun. I do lean Flowers to get the decision.